that current model of that the rich get the money, then Barca, Real Madrid raid teams like Sevilla and buy the best players from around the world. That money goes to the bottom feeders. And Florentino's main point on El Larguero was that, okay, more of that, but on even a more macro level, let's accentuate that and keep doing it that way. My counter to that would be, I would much prefer, and I'm speaking as an honest Real Madrid fan, I would much prefer that Real Madrid don't get richer and the smaller teams don't benefit from that. What I would rather have is equality among all teams in the league from a TV revenue standpoint, just like the NBA model. And by the way, I won't say with who, but I was talking on Slack with a couple of other journalists, and we were just talking about like the outrage over like America. Like for some reason, America was brought into this as an evil entity, like who had nothing to do with it. Like don't Americanize our sport. Actually, if you look at this model, it had nothing to do with the American model. It was the European Basketball Super League. That's what it was modeling. It was actually modeling a European idea, not an American one, by the way. I would much prefer an NBA style revenue sharing, where in the NBA, and I don't remember I don't know if the figures are updated now, but as of 2017, I think every team was getting 150 million annually from TV rights, equally shared. So can we see a world where Real Madrid and Leganes, for example, receive the exact amount of TV revenue? Of course, in the NBA, you don't eliminate the capitalism altogether, because on top of the TV revenue, a team like the New York Knicks will generate more because of their market, the massive size of their market, right, than a team like the New Orleans Pelicans. But from a TV standpoint, they get equal share. And so I would rather push for that than to go the other way and make this even more extreme and divide the gap even more than it is. That's my personal feeling. And I think part of the problem is, like, you talked about the privately owned companies and privately owned clubs in England. There's a lot of them, PSG and all that. And La Liga's, Real Madrid and Barcelona, these teams they're fan owned. And from Florentino's perspective, he's saying we cannot compete with all these privately owned clubs anymore. So we're screwed by 2024. Which is true. So what I think the solution to that is like, I don't think you can eliminate privately owned clubs. What you could probably do, though, is to say privately owned clubs, well, basically just enforce FFP like you said you were going to kind of prevent this complete discrepancy. But I would say, like,
which is not happening. The opposite is happening.
Well,
becoming more flexible,
and the smaller teams are getting punished more than the bigger teams are for it. And I would say, like, I'm okay with England making more TV money than Spain, because that's what they did. That's what they did for the marketing of the league. They created a product that's good enough to earn that TV money. And I don't think you can eliminate that. I don't think you should absolve that. And you can't, it's different leagues. You're talking about two different leagues. And again, this is the difference, is that when you have so many different entities, you can't come to the consensus. But now I'm curious, Diego, like, what happens now that we've basically absolved the Super League? Where do we shift our attention to? Like, Gundogan's tweet, did you see it yesterday?
No.
Gundogan was basically saying, okay, we got rid of the Super League. Now can we talk about this new Champions League format, which is insane? Right. Pep said, did you see Pep's quote today?
Yeah. I saw that.
So Pep said, we have to increase the calendar year to 400 days to accommodate all these extra games. So now can we shift our attention to other things? I put out a tweet yesterday, which I love when my tweets will trigger one or two people, because I can immediately expose and block them for being the way they are. So my tweet said, can we see the same uprising against racism and the human rights violations of Qatar? One person said, this is whataboutism. I blocked it immediately and just laughed about it. And in my head is like, you want to say this is whataboutism? Actually, it's directly related, because UEFA and FIFA can create an uprising against the Super League because it takes money from them. They don't want to create an uprising against Qatar because they're getting money from that, right? So that's where I'd like to shift the hypocrisy to, like, not necessarily towards the fans and these guys who are enjoying football as it is and they love the sport, but these other.
But I was talking in general on all sides.
Yeah,
on all fronts, there's hypocrisy on all fronts.
There is.
I wasn't finger pointing like only to the fans, not at all. I was finger pointing also to colleagues, fellow colleagues, ex-colleagues.
Right. So
and what you mentioned.
Yeah, and so anyways, and some people were like, well, why are we only talking about Qatar? Like, there's this human rights violations in this country and that country. Like, great. I don't like that is more whataboutism to be than talking about what's directly we're talking about. The next upcoming tournament run by FIFA is in Qatar. That's what we're talking about. Yes, I believe that everyone should be treated fairly equally in every nook and cranny of the earth. Sure. But the next upcoming thing that is directly related to this is what's happening in Qatar, and there's no uprising over that. I think the next step would be a players' union where players feel comfortable speaking out so that Toni Kroos can actually speak his truth. He's been trying to say things, but he feels a little bit like he's not allowed to. He's talking about...
Why you mention him?
Because on a podcast recently in November, I think it was, on his podcast, he said that we're puppets and basically we don't have a say in this crazy schedule and playing as many games as we do, right? And he also mentioned that if there was a players' union, then that could change, but there isn't a players' union. So that would be a huge next step, is to form a players' union to actually get all these important voices heard, because no matter what, the argument of like, shut up, you're getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars to play football. Not every single player is playing that. There are players in the lower leagues of Spain. Like, we've seen this, by the way, that players actually don't get paid by the clubs because the clubs don't have money. So don't say that. Like, so, you could argue that maybe it would hold more merit if a player that is not making that kind of money came out and said something. But I would also, while that's true, I would also say the bigger names coming out could get the ball rolling. Much like LeBron James has more power than any single player in the NBA because of who he is as a figure. So if he comes out and says something, the NBA listens to that. I think it's the same thing in football, right? The football world will listen to Lionel Messi coming out and saying something more than they would.
So
I don't know.
Why do you think Kroos is being gagged then? What makes you say that he's not allowed to say what he wants to say?
I can't say that if he's allowed or not. I can't really speak to see I don't know the truth there. My assumption would be that because they're employed. I mean, we know that Real Madrid have contracts based on confidentiality and things that you're allowed to say publicly and what you're not allowed to say. I think there's probably something real there. I also just think that
I would just like to know what they're not gonna fire him. Like, they're not gonna kick him off the team. And if he would get handed a fine for voicing his opinion on an issue where the club has one stance and he has another, then again, based on his quote, or based on what you were saying, what you were paraphrasing there, I'm sure he'd be happy to pay the fine if it was for the good of the game or good for the players, the people, to get a revolution going, to get a revolution started. You have to speak up and stand your ground. I'm perplexed as to why he would feel that he's not allowed to, again, speak his mind.
So I agree with you.
Being the player that he is. If we're talking Mariano, then I'm just like, okay, maybe. Yeah. But Kroos is.
I agree with you. I agree with you. It may be easier said than done, but some of these rules, I often do wonder how enforceable they were. Because, let's say a scenario exists where Toni Kroos says something against Real Madrid, for example, okay? And he gets fined for that. Is it that PR of Real Madrid actually fining Toni Kroos for that, I think would be worse for them.
Right, also, yeah.
In the long run, because I think then that would be opposed with a bunch of players coming out and supporting Kroos, right? So I agree with you, but again, I guess I can't speak to what those contracts look like, and I can't really speak to what it's